Last week I got through the first one, Leviticus 23, and this was the commandment that they were to keep this Pentecost festival. And remember, Pentecost was 50 days after the first fruit celebration, okay? And the difference was the first one was the barley harvest. This is now the wheat harvest. The barley harvest, they had the grains whole. Here they ground the flour and made it very fine. And God is kind of taking his people on a journey. So the first one, when they talk about getting rid of all the leaven, getting rid of the sin in our lives so that we are saved, and that's all of the unleavened bread for the 7 days, okay? Then we go into the next harvest festival, which shows that we are now with God, okay? That he has saved us and purified us, and then this is really a new man. We become a new man. Now, at the time of Jesus, it has moved not only from a harvest festival, but also a festival of God giving the law. Because the people felt that the law was given after they got into not to the Holy Land, but into the desert area, into their wanderings, 50 days later. So they called it Pentecost, okay? And the thunder and lightning on the hill was all part of that, okay? And that kind of plays in. So they kind of put those two things together. So, and that's important to understand because we're going to see that played out in the New Testament. So we're looking at Exodus 19:1. On the first day of the 3rd month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. So now they're in the desert of Sinai and God is going to give them the law. We're going to skip a few verses. It's the first page that we're looking at. Yes, yeah. And I'm on Exodus 19:10. Okay? So this is where the giving of the law. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes." Consecrate means to separate for a holy purpose. Okay? So they were going to be preparing themselves for something very special. Washing was something the Old Testament people did a lot. Purification. Okay? Very cleanly in comparison to the other nations. I think that was God's way of protecting them from a lot of the diseases. And be ready on the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, "Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death." God is going to come down to the people. They're not going to go up to God. God is coming down to us. Same thing, God comes to us in Christ. Now, why he didn't want them to touch the mountain, I have no really great explanation for that. This was God's command. I think he didn't want them thinking, "Oh, I can go over and I can get God." You know, he's going to be here, but it's not something we hold on to. Be careful that you do. Okay, I'm sorry. Put to death. 13. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain. So that's, have you all heard the blowing of the ram's horn? The shofar? The shofar is what the Jewish people call it today, okay? And they would blow that, and that would be used to call people to worship, okay? Even today, go online sometime and put in blowing of the shofar. It's a very interesting instrument. I've tried to blow it. I can not do it at all. Okay? Yeah. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Okay, I have a comment just real quick.
Yeah.
They have different sizes of shofars.
Yes.
But usually in the meadows or in the hills, they have the great big,
big long ones, usually curved.
Yes, and then synagogue over here, I just had one about like this. Yeah, but it seemed to me that he blew it. It seemed like it was hitting me right in the face because of the ram's horn was so bent. Yeah.
There's not only different sizes, there's also different categories of them. okay? So you can have a shofar that is kosher, means been blessed by the rabbi. Or you can have a shofar that's kosher in the sense that it's not only blessed by the rabbi, it came from a kosher animal. You can also have a ram's horn that's blessed by the rabbi from a kosher animal that was fed kosher food.
Cool.
Okay? And sometimes you'll see them up, even today in Israel, they'll be up on the, what do they call them, parapets? The high...
I think that's the right word.
Parapets? Oh. Parapets, yeah, way up high. And they'll be blowing the ram's horn to call people to worship. It's like, and when Christians came to the United States, they all had a bell in the tower, and they would ring the bell, okay? But the shofar has different sounds. It was not only used for that, it was also an instrument of war. And they had, if you hear this blast, it means this. And there are people who are really experts at blowing the shofar, okay?
I think you have to be a trombone player or one of those.
To know how to play it well.
Horn.
Yeah. There's actually schools where they teach it, okay? Now, all the people who would blow the ram's horn were all from the tribe of Levite, okay? So the Levites not only became the rabbis in the temple and the ones who did the sacrifice, they were also the ones who did the worship services, blew the ram's horn, took care of the synagogues and the temple. It was any church worker really came from the tribe of Levite. Okay? They would blow this ram's horn to call everyone together. Okay, and it's the long blast. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. We're going to come into the Lord's presence in purity. Again, this whole thing has to do with purity and making yourself new. Okay? Then he said to the people, prepare yourselves for the third day, abstain from sexual relations. On the day of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. This was a frightening thing, okay? Have you ever been at home in the last week when we've had some of those thunderstorms? And what do? You kind of jump, don't you? And then the next thing that happens, you get a dog in your lap. The last golden retriever we had was really frightened. She would climb right up on your lap. This one will come over and lay right on your feet so you can't get up and move. If you're going anywhere, I'm going with you.
Our dog used to go underneath the bed.
Yeah.
And she wouldn't come out for hours after the storm. Yeah.
The only reason I'm sharing that with you is just get this in your mind, how, this must have been a traumatic thing. I mean, we can kind of kid about this and say, well, they trembled? What was that? But if you had that rumbling going on all the time and boy, it could be very frightening. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. It's almost like an earthquake. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up. Okay. Now we're going to skip a couple of chapters, okay, because this is the rest of the story, okay? We're looking at Exodus 32. It's on the back of the sheet, just where we were reading, okay? Just if you turn it over. So Moses has now gone up, and he's receiving the law from God, okay? So this is the continuation. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us." So why Aaron?
He's his brother.
He's Moses' brother. He's also serving as the chief priest at this time. Okay? And, we talk about the blessing that I do at the end, the Lord bless you and keep you. That is called the Aaronic blessing because it came from Aaron, Moses' brother. He was the first high priest. Okay? And they were used to having all these gods. Okay? In fact, for a long time, they're kind of going back and forth between these household gods and God Almighty, the only God. All right? So they come to him and say, we got to have a God to follow. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. They think, well, Moses is gone. He's probably dead. He's up there on the mountain. He's met God. He's died. We need somebody to follow. Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing." Okay? That might shock some people, but the Old Testament people, men and women, did wear earrings, okay? And bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it to an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fastening it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." As far as we can tell, probably what they did was make out of wood a calf, and then they took the gold and they beat it on, made sheets on. So it would be more like gold leaf, and it would be pure gold. Okay, I think some people think there was, from some of the movies, it looks like a great big all golden thing. But later on, we'll see that it sounds more like it's just covered with gold. Okay. Okay, wait a minute. What verse? Okay, they gave him to him, made him into an idol. Okay. These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Well, Aaron's kind of fallen off the track, hasn't he? Yeah. Now remember, Aaron and Moses have only just gotten to know each other for the last 50 days. Because Moses was in exile all that time. Well, no, it would go more than that because all of the plagues. But it's a short period of time, okay, that they've really known each other. And Aaron grew up in Egypt. He knew all the gods. And they were probably dabbling back and forth and kind of bringing in these false gods. And I think that's one of the reasons that they have to remain in the desert for 40 years to get all of this out of their system. Because the next generation won't know it. Okay? And they're trying to change that as they go into the Holy Land. All right.
So are they brothers?
Yeah.
Well, but Moses was born from the Israelite woman, and then he was brought to Egypt. So where Aaron? Whose mother was Aaron?
Same mother.
Same mother.
Same
How'd
mother.
they get together?
When he came back, after God called him and he came back.
Came back to Egypt.
Came back to Egypt. Yeah. They were still in Egypt.
Okay.
But at this time, the commandment of no worshiping idols had not been.
Had not been given yet.
Right.
Yes. But they were supposed to be. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were monolithic. They were one God. Not monolithic.
Monotheistic.
Monotheistic. One God.
Monolithic is one rock.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I stand on that rock, don't I? a little shaky a bit. Yeah.
First person Bauer.
Yeah.
I need to hit him with a rock.
Yeah.
Or an idol.
Yeah.
So Moses knew who his brother was.
There's a lot we don't know about that, and that's where you see all these movies kind of trying to fill it in. That Moses really didn't know who he was. I think he did know who he was. And I think that they kind of kept it secret. We do know that he's adopted by Pharaoh's sister, okay? And we think that she couldn't have any children, She sees him in the bulrushes. She sees this as a sign from God and kind of takes him out and raises him. But I have a feeling he knew. Now, some of this is just conjecture, okay? You know, when you look at Charleston, Heston, and some of the local ones, it's like he didn't know, and then all of a sudden he found out he was, and you know, and they show him building the city of Ramses. He would not have been. That was before that time period. So a lot of it is, you know, not correct, or is at best a guess. Okay, so we don't really know. What we do know is that he at some point associates with his family, because remember, he goes and he kills the overseer because he's misusing his people. So he must have somehow or another known that he was an Israelite. How that is, we don't have good
Especially
information.
if he knew that Aaron was his brother.
Yeah. Yeah. And he could have known Aaron before, but what I'm saying is Moses really was separated for those 40 years out in the desert, okay, before he came back. So now Aaron is very much into the Egyptian culture and Moses is not, okay, because Moses has had to rely out in the desert on a different system altogether than what the Egyptians were.
At that time, the 40 years would have been not necessarily our 365 days, right?
Yeah.
That hadn't been decided yet, right?
No, they were using a calendar. They were using a lunar calendar at that time.
That's right.
Yeah.
Feast.
Yeah. Okay, so when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterwards they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Oh, they're having a good old time. All right? Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt." I left them for 50 days and look at what happened. Okay? They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." And we see still today some parts of that world where cows are considered sacred, you know? So this really comes from the oldest of times. "I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people." What do you think that means, stiff-necked people?
I'm better than everybody else.
Okay. If you're stiff-necked, you only look one way. You can't turn and see anything else. They're stubborn. They're not going the right way. They're not watching out. All right? That's when I hear stiff-necked people. They have German blood in them. Just didn't know it yet. Okay. "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." So at this point, God is going to say, "I'm going to start all over." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt, great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out to kill them in the mountains, to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by yourself. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be an inheritance forever." So those covenant promises that were promised generations ago, they're still passing down to one another. Even though they haven't been in the Holy Land for 400 years, they're still saying, "Hey, God has made this promise to us and it's going to be fulfilled someday." Can you imagine that? You know, it is amazing. It's amazing that, first of all, it hadn't been changed. Because, you know, as time goes along, the stories always change a little bit. Family history always kind of changes. okay? If you ever watch, what's the show with the inheritance and they look back on their ancestry?
Ancestry.
Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are? Have you ever seen that show?
Oh, yeah.
It's on
Who do you think
TLC.
you are? They go back and trace their ancestry. And 4 or 5 generations back, they've lost the history, you know? Or the history has changed.
The name changes. I've got Tom's
Yeah.
all the way back to
Yes,
1500 and
yes,
something.
yes.
A lot of people.
Benita's father, the reason she's called Benita and not Bonita, is because her father was Ben. And when we look back on the censuses, for every census they had him listed as Benjamin. And we were always told by the family it was not Benjamin, it was just Ben. And even his father, who was Ben, because he was Ben Jr., okay, they had listed as Benjamin. Well, her grandfather had, when he got his Social Security, had to go back and get a delayed birth certificate, okay? And he had like 4 or 5 pieces of evidence, okay? It was from the military and from all different church records and things like that. And every time his name was Ben. And all we can figure out is when the census people came around and asked, what's your name? And they said, Ben Hagler. They said, oh, and they wrote down Benjamin. Because they assumed that that was a nickname, but it was his actual name, okay? So things change with time. But this is generation after generation, and they're still passing that down from one generation to another. That God is going to bless them, that someday they're going to be in this holy land, that their ancestors are going to be as numerous as the stars. And you wonder sometimes why the people who live in Israel fight so hard for that land. Because this is it. This is our promise. God told us that's our land. I don't care what anyone else says. I don't care what the government says. This is my land. Because God gave it to me. That's the feeling, okay? Okay, so he's pleading on behalf of the people. And then 14, then the Lord relented and did not bring on the people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with, look at this, the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. Always had 2, one for each party. We'll later, oh no, it's right here. I thought it was a couple of verses. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. Okay, so if you see a movie where they have the 10 commandments side by side, it's not correct. Okay, not biblically correct. Okay, I'm sure all of you have seen, even in Christian bookstores, you know, the tablets, you know, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh, no, 10. 11 and 12 are mine. Yeah. A quick story off the subject, you know. Jesus was confronted and asked what was the most important commandment. They had over 600 commandments at the time of Jesus.
602.
I can't remember the exact
602.
number. Yeah. And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And a second one is of equal weight, love your neighbor as yourself. When our son Benjamin was getting confirmed, he called his godfather and invited him to come. And his godfather, and they're on the phone together, the godfather said, well, let me give you a test. And Ben said, okay. He said, what's the most important commandment? And our son Ben said, honor your mother and father. And he said, no, Ben, you know, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And Ben responded back to his godfather, you don't know my parents, do you? I guess that commandment I pushed a little bit hard.
It worked.
Yeah. So, you know, okay. Where was I?
Honor your father and your mother.
17. When Joshua heard the noise of the people shouting, he said to Moses, there is sound of war in the camp. All this revelry, you know, they said they're shouting and carrying on. It must be that someone's attacked them. Moses replied, it is not the sound of victory. It's not the sound of defeat. It's the sound of singing that I hear. All right. When Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hand, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. Just a side note here that I always find interesting. These tablets were carved out of stone by God. Okay? Moses has to go back up on the mountain, and he gets a second set of tablets, and God makes him carve the stone out himself. Okay? You know, God is forgiving and loving, but there are consequences to the sin. And that was Moses' consequences. God gave it to him the first time. Second time, you got to work for it. Okay? And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Yeah, I know. Doesn't that sound absolutely disgusting? There was no way you're going to get that back again. You know, if we just took it and we burned it. And that's why I think when it says he burned it in the fire, that the interior must have been wood. Okay, that's what I'm basing it on. Okay? Or some kind of hollowy, yeah. But this is a way of getting rid of it. You can't get it back anymore. There's just no way. He said to Aaron, "What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?" "Do not be angry, my lord," Aaron answered. "You know how prone these people are to anger." What does that sound to you?
To evil.
Oh, to evil. How prone these people are to evil. I was thinking of the question before I finished reading it. What does that sound like to you? Does it remind you of anything? It reminds me of the Garden of Eden. When God confronted Adam and said, "Why did you do this?" And what does he say? "That woman..."
Made me do it.
He goes even further. "That woman you gave me made me do it."
That's every day.
Yeah.
Pass the blame.
Pass the blame.
Yeah.
It wasn't me. I didn't want this, Moses. It was those people who wanted it. You know how evil they can be. They said to me, "Make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow, Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." So I told them, "Whoever has gold jewelry, take it off." Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire. And out came this calf. Yeah.
That really makes sense.
In some ways, it's kind of comical, isn't it? You never see that in the movies, however.
Alive before his time.
It wasn't my fault. These people made me do it, and it just magically appeared. Okay, yeah. He wasn't willing to take the blame for it, the consequences. Okay. Moses saw that the people were running wild, and that Aaron had let them get out of control, and so became a laughing stock to their enemies. Okay? We know that part of the problems as they're going through this desert area, I think sometimes we think this desert area has nobody. There's other tribes that are living in this desert area. And some of them are traders, some are raiders, and they raid other tribes to get the things they need, and they steal from them. Okay? And we know that because later on, one of the tribes, which is one of the weaker tribes, is kind of in the back, and they're attacked as they're moving along. And you got 40,000 people to move along. Okay? So you can't, you got all these people stretched out over the desert. So they actually at one point change how the configuration is that they move along. Okay? Because they don't want that weak tribe in the back anymore to get picked off. Okay? It kind of reminds me when I look at these nature shows, that you have the wild beasts and the mother and father kind of protect the babies, and the wild beasts that want to eat them kind of hold back until one of the stragglers gets back there, or one of the babies gets separated, and that's who they attack. That's what was going on when they were moving through the desert area. So Moses is saying, we have these enemies around us. Okay? It wasn't just deserted. It wasn't deserted like we think of the desert, there's nobody around. There was other tribes. That's what I'm trying to share.
Amalekites.
Yeah, that was part of them. So he stood at the entrance to the camp and said, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." And all the Levites rallied to him. So all the priests came over to him. Then he said to them, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Each man strap a sword to his side. Go back and forth through the camp from one end to the other, each killing his brother and friend and neighbor." The Levites did as Moses commanded, and that day about 3,000 of the people died. So that was the consequences of their sin. But it was also the ones who said they weren't going to stand with God. Sometimes we have to eliminate them. And I don't mean by death. This was God's command. I would not say that today. Moses said, "You have been set apart to the Lord today, for you were against your sons and brothers, and he has blessed you this day." Remember when Jesus talked, he said, you know, when you become my follower, it might mean leaving family and livelihood and everything behind. Okay? It's a commitment. The next day Moses said to the people, "You have committed a great sin. But now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make an atonement for your sin." So Moses went back to the Lord and said, "Oh, what a great sin these people have committed. They have made themselves gods of gold. But now, please forgive their sin. But if not, then blot me out of the book you have written, the book of life." Okay? That is important. Keep that in the back of your mind. Because when we get to Yom Kippur, the festival, the people teach that the book of life is open for 7 days, and you got to get your name in the book of life so you have another year. Okay? So that's going to become another festival. All right? Very important. So Moses is saying, I'm putting my life on the line for my people. Now go... the Lord replied to Moses, "Whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book." All right? Also, if you can listen to the tapes that Pastor Braun is doing, this also plays into the book of Revelation. Now, I'll share a little bit with you, but I can't go into that in full detail. But when we get to Yom Kippur, it talks about the book of life and that we as believers have our name permanently written in the book of life. Okay? So you can see, here we are in Exodus, and you can see how we're moving all the way through the scriptures to Revelation to fulfill these commandments. Okay. My angel, now go lead the people to the place I spoke of, and my angel will go before you. However, when the time comes for me to punish, I will punish them for their sin. And the Lord struck the people with a plague because of what they did with the calf Aaron had made. So this, and that's not part of the Pentecost story, okay? Now, why am I sharing all that with you? Because it plays into what's going on at the time of Jesus. Not only is this a wheat harvest festival, it's also a festival of the giving of the law. Okay, so let's look. Now you should have the new sheet. It says Pentecost in the New Testament at the top. Everybody have that? Okay, great. Okay, and we're reading from Acts 2, and this is now the celebration. Now, Pentecost, which we celebrate today, even as Christians, was not originally a Christian celebration. It was a festival of the Jewish people. And it was one of the required festivals to come to the temple. So there was people from all over the world, Jews, who were coming to Israel to celebrate this Pentecost festival. I know. I'm really past my time. Can I go 5 more minutes? Okay.
Why don't you stop now and then we'll start all over fresh next Sunday? Wouldn't that be better?
Okay. Okay, we'll stop right here.
No offense, you're going to forget where you stopped off.
And I'm going to share with you. Yeah, I know. Now, before
my rock? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let's close with a prayer, and then I have something to share with you. Just some dates. Okay. Let's pray.